Okay. Kulana Black Gemara, we're up to Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. We're in the middle of discussing the argument between Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim, which method we use do we use a method of klal prat to klal, do we use a method of ribuy mir to ribuy? So now the Gemara is saying that if we're using the method, according to him, that we use a method of ribuy mir to ribuy, how does he know the concept of prat kal prat? Because we learned it from Nazir, the fact that the Torah first starts off with a prat, the yayin, the shecher, and then it goes to a klal, the kolashi, osam, a geffen, everything you make from the grapes, and then it goes back to a prat where it says mechatzoni v'adzog. But that's how we learned the concept of prat klal prat. But he doesn't. He uses the chatzoni v'adzog, the prat, the end to teach you a law about chatzon and zog. So where does he know the principle of prat klal prat? Says the Gemara. And according to some Rishonim, even though he doesn't believe in the whole idea of klal prat klal, but when it comes to prat klal prat, he does believe in it. So where does he know it from? Or according to other Rishonim, it's not that he argues in this concept of klal prat klal. Sometimes he does believe in the general klal prat klal, as Taisus the first part brings a number of instances in Shas where we learn things from klal prat klal, and the Gemara does not bring an opinion that this disagrees, which would mean that he also agrees sometimes in klal prat klal, where it's more obvious. Anyway, says the Gemara. So where does he learn from? Gemara be two different places. Says the Gemara. Right in the middle of the page. Where does he know the concept prat kal prat? When talked about Shemrim, it says by Shemrim, it says in the pasuk, if you give to your friend, which sounds like you give him anything, and then becomes very specific: a donkey, a cow, or a sheep. Prat, that's a prat. The whole behema. Now we're not going to use v'chayitin as the original klal. We're going to ignore that. We're going to ignore that for the moment. The whole, most Rishonim dash the whole is a klal, and behema lishma chazar parat. The whole is anything, and then it says behema lishma, behema to God. The way our Gemara's text is written is a bit hard to understand how the chol behema, the klal, how can lishma be chazar parat? Lishma sound like anything. Anyhow, prat uklalu prat. That's a prat klalu prat. I atadon elke ena prat. So the laws of Shmira only apply to things which are dover hametaltul, things which are mobile. The gufa mammon, they themselves have essentially a value. Only then do we say that you have the laws of Shmira, that you have to swear and so on and so forth. So we do. So from there he learns out the concept of prat klal prat, anything which is similar to the prat. Okay, Rava says Nafkol Haikra. Rava wants to introduce another pasuk with the same idea as there. In the beginning of Vayikra, when it talks about the karbonos that you bring, it says in the pasuk that if you bring from your sheep your carbon, and from the lambs or the goats, and so on. So it says V'im min, if from means not even all. So that's like a prat. Within the sheep, it's min. So that means that we exclude certain sheep, either a reiba v'nirba, a sheep that was had committed bestiality, or set aside for avodah zarah, mukta, or never is actually used for avodah zarah. The min prat, if it's what? If it's a prat, that's very limiting. Hat sign sounds like any sheep is a klal. Then kvasi v'izim, you again delineating within the sheep. You're saying lambs and goats. Chazo prat, prat klal prat. Yatadon ela ke'ena prat. Comes to teach you similar to the prat. And to exclude those animals we just mentioned. That's what the Rava wants to say as well. The same idea. Prat klal prat. Says the Gemara, you can't, if you're going to learn it from there, why don't you learn from an earlier pasuk? We can learn from the earlier pasuk in the beginning, right? In the beginning of Vayikra, it says, right? There's being a carbon, it says behema. It says behema generally, then and so on. They have the same idea. So there it says min, which is a prat. Within the behemoth, it's from the behemoth, which means not all the behemoths. Which means prat. Ha behemoth is a klal, and bokav itzayin again is chazar prat. Prat klal prat. Then go to prat. Same idea. Why do you have to learn two psukim later from tzayin? Go earlier and learn from behemoth. Now sometimes we say that a chay is included in the behemoth, non-domestic animal as well included in the behemoth. So Amalei Rava said, no, I didn't want to learn from the first pasuk. You can't really learn from there. And why can't you learn from there? Because what are you going to say? What are you coming to exclude? You want to say that mina behem is coming to exclude chayis. That's what you're saying. That you're excluding chayis. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's fine. It's okay.
Oh, okay, good. is coming to exclude non-domestic animals that are kosher. So he says to him, so Rabbi says, Omalei min hai, from the earlier pasuk Vayikra lekol mashma, you can learn from there. Why not? Because if it had been from there, I would have said, ha-behema chaya b'chlal behema. I would have thought that chaya is included behema because we have a general rule when it's Hashem says these are the kosher animals and these are the animals you should eat. It says this is behema, and then it starts naming, including tzvi, a deer, which is a chaya. So we see that chaya is included behema. So I would have thought that a behema would be included. That's why we don't use that pasuk to teach you. Amalei chaya b'chal behema. How can you even think that a chay is included behema? The Torah clearly says examples that it gives in the prat. Like see, it says bulk of its sign. V'havelei prat to klal prat. So this would be a perfect example of a prat klal prat. The atadon elkein prat, and you want to learn from there. So he's not arguing that there's another pasuk, just saying why bring it from the later pasuk, bring from the earlier one. So we have a few sources that even according to Rav Elazar, we have the principle of prat klal uprat that comes to include things which are similar to the prat. Says Gemara, how do you know that when you have a prat klal prat? Okay, now we know there's such a method of learning, but how do you know how to use it? How do you know that the method from prat kal prat comes to tell you that anything which is similar to the prat is included, and anything which is dissimilar is not included? I know that's the method that we use, or I know that's the way we learn or derive from there. Says Gemara, I know that's the method. The Tanya we learned. It says in Pasuk, when it comes to Meiser, it says, what do you do with the Meiser Sheni money? You've swapped your fruits over there in the first, second, fourth, or fifth year. 10% of it you have to bring with you to the Shalim and eat it there. So and then you take, it's too difficult to bring all those fruits and vegetables with you. So what you do is you swap it over for money, and you take that money and you go to Shalim. And what do you do with that money? You purchase food. What food? So the Pasuk says, you take that money and use it for the chol asher ta'av, anything that you desire, which is a klal, anything. Then the pasuk delineates bakar, cattle, batzayin, sheep, yayin, wine, sheikha, and old wine, which is a prat, right? It's very limiting. And then it says anything that you desire. Chazav v'kol, it's a klal prat to klal, klal prat to klal. Now remember, until this juncture, we're learning that prat, klal, uprat, and klal, prat to klal are very similar. And what do we do in that pasuk there? So what do we learn from there? So what can you use the money of Meiser Sheni for? We use it for to include anything which is similar to the prat. What do you mean? What's similar to the prat? There's 4 examples that the Torah gives over there: bakar, tzayin, wine, and old wine. Maha prat mefudish primipri. They all emerge from something else. And gidule karka, they all have to do with the ground. Even animals were not, born from the ground, but they fodder, their food. The sustenance comes from the ground. Avko pri vigdule karka comes to exclude, for example, water, salt, or fish, because fish are not gedule karka. So none of those things can be brought up. You cannot use the money to buy those products in your shalayim and say this is what I'm using my money for. So it's similar in a few properties. It's close enough. In other words, we extrapolate from this particular item. It's not so much this item; it's more the description of that item. So it's not the animal; it's how the animal came into existence. Yeah. Where of course the Torah talks all the time only about behemoth. Behemoth, Tzayda Bakar, it always talks about behemoth, so therefore obviously it's within behemoth we break it down further. Here we give examples of things which are not behemoths. Yayin v'sheikha. So now the one has a question we started off in the beginning. Mechdi, klal uprat uklal. So now we're going to go through interesting how this works. Klal uprat uklal. You might ask a question, not really a question, you might sort of teasing it out. You have a klal prat to klal. What do we say? You have an inclusive word, a specific word, an inclusive word. We include anything which is similar to the specific word. Ke'ein prata deninin. Klola basa mahani. If you have only a prat and klal, doesn't it do the same thing? You have a prat. Forget let's say you had a klal and a prat. Sorry, you have a klal and a prat. A klal is inclusive. Then the Torah uses a specific word. What would we do right then and there? We would then say anything similar to the prat. So therefore, what does the second klal come to add? A hani comes to add. Gemara explains how it works. That's not how it works. Klal or prat, the prat is not coming to define the klal. The prat is coming to cancel the klal. Ein bechlal ela masha befrat. We said if you have an inclusive word and then you have a specific word, the specific word cancels the inclusive word, and it's only ein bechlal ela masha befrat. Comes along the second klal and now expands the prat. So that's how klal prat works. Gemara is teasing out how klal prat works and then how klal prat or klal works. It comes to add anything which is similar. Okay, then the Gemara says v'su prat uklal uprat. You have a rule of klal prat klal. Ke'ena prat. You just told us the same thing. That klal prat klal is the same idea. That why do you include anything which is similar to the prat? Dainin and prat mahani. Again, if you only have the you only had the prat and klal, and we didn't have the last prat. How would we use that? Wouldn't we look at it as prat or klal, anything similar to the prat? Okay, the klal is not. It's not like it's not ein b'klal masha prat, because the prat is first and then the klal. That means the klal is expansive, and l'chayda, the klal is only telling you things that are similar to the prat. So what does the second prat come to add? No, so Gemara says it's not how it works. If you only had a prat and a klal, I would have thought that the klal only adds something similar to the prat. That's how I would have thought. Now that we have this prat at the end, tells you no. When you have a prat and a klal, the klal cancels the prat, and the klal includes everything. I would have thought that the klal is coming to add much more expansive. Comes along the second. That's how prat and klal works. If you have a prat followed by a klal, we don't say, oh, only things which are similar to the prat. No, even things which are not so similar, even pretty remotely similar to the prat. As long as it's not the opposite of the prat, we would include it. But having a prat, klal, prat, it means you only add things which are similar to the specific item you mentioned. So now I'm going to ask a simple question. Let me see. Train klali prat. You tell me now whether it's a klal prat or klal, whether it's a prat klal or prat, it's the same thing. So why do we have two different methods of learning? Why does it try to use two different methods when basically the outcome is the same? If you have first a klal, inclusive word, prat, and then a klal, or you have first a prat and then a klal, and then a prat, it's the same thing. So why does it say that you use two different methods? So it's not exactly the same thing. If you have two klali and pratim, if you have, let's say, klal, prat uklal, then how similar does it have to be? Because there's only one prat there. So if it's similar in one respect, that's good enough. That's close enough, good enough, and you can include that in this law. But in the case we have prat, klal, prat, we need it to be similar in more than one respect. Because you have two pratim that tell you it has to be similar in two respects, not just in one respect. Even though we just learned the Gemara about a shomer there, which is prat, klal, prat, and over there we learned two dinim. We learned it has to be similar in two respects. It has to be dover hametaltul with gufa mammon. It has to be something which is portable. No, it's land. If you give me land to watch for you, and if something happens to it, I don't have to swear. And it has to be something which is gufa mammon. It has to be it itself money, but it itself is not money. Let's say a document or star, and it got lost. I don't have to swear. So there we see it's a prat, klal, prat, and yet we're saying it has to be similar in two respects. And Jesus wants to say that those two respects are so obvious. It's really more or less the same idea. That it's not an animal. They're both not an animal. They're both very similar. They're both exactly the same problem. Why they're not an animal, and therefore which prat are you going to learn and which one are you going to exclude? So it must be in that case you learn both, even though it's only a prat, klal, or prat. It's a klal, prat, klal, or prat, klal, prat. Says the Gemara, or klal, prat, klal. Says the Gemara, or klal, prat, klal. Then he went further. Now this is very interesting. Says the Gemara, Merdi, prat, klal. What did you just say? What's a prat, klal? You said if you only had a prat followed by a klal, it'd be very expensive. Nasa klal, moisel, a prat. Visrabe kol mila, you would include everything. But if you have a miyut riboy, nami ribi hako, visrabe kol mili. So a miyut and a riboy and a prat and a klal is the same thing. So what's the argument? You're telling me this school believes that the methodology, like the Bishmo says, klal, prat, klal, and all the ramifications, and the other school, we're giving others a whole no, the method is riboy and miyut. But when it comes to miyut and riboy, the outcome is exactly the same. That it's all expansive. What's the meaning of two methods? There is a difference. Will include everything. We're going to include leaves and branches. But if you use miyat the riboy lulavin, we won't include. It's not as expensive. We'll include the lulavin, the shoots, but we won't include all in loy, but not the leaves, not the leaves. And Taisa wants to say different kinds of shoots. But before we said the shoots are included, where because he's using the method of meat riba, yet we included shoots. They're talking about moist shoots, moist leaves, and they're talking about dry leaves. Now, what's interesting is that in every respect, riba and meat and riba is far more expensive than klal prat klal. So how suddenly, when it comes to meat and riba, do we say that prat and klal is more expensive than meat and riba? When it comes to klal prat klal, we say you only marbeke ena prat. When you say riba meat riba, it's all expensive except something which is like the opposite of the prat. So how suddenly, when it comes to meat and riba, do we say that that's far less expensive than prat and klal? So one of the explanations of Shainim is as follows. As we said in Gemara before, if you have a klal followed by a prat, what does the prat do? It cancels the klal. It doesn't define the klal, it cancels it. So ein b'klal ela masha b'frat. You had a klal before, it cancels it. So therefore, that's the method. It cancels. So if you have the other way around, a prat and then a followed by a klal, the klal cancels the prat. So what's limiting it? That's why it's all expensive. When you have a riba and a miyat, if you have a riba and a miyat, what happens? The miyat defines the riba. It doesn't limit the riba, it defines it. When we said riba, it has to be similar to the miyat. A riba and a miyat, just like we hold a klal protocol. So it's similar to the miyat. It doesn't cancel. So if you have a miyat followed by a riba, the riba doesn't cancel. It defines the miyat. Let's be more expensive, but there's still a miyat there. Therefore, we have to break up between the leaves and the shoots. Okay, that finishes the sugi. Was a bit complicated, but that gives us a little insight into Rabbi Shmuel Omer we say every day. Now we know what we're talking about. Says the Gemara. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Kiva came along and said that when you dip your bread into wine, we include for the size of an olive, not just the quantity of the wine, but we also include the bread that you ate. And if the combination of the two is, if the aggregate of the two is a kazayis, you will get your lashes. Yeah. So the Gemara, in other words, Rabbi Kiva says that even though bread is permitted, we're now going to count it as part of the forbidden part. In other words, heter mitzdaref lisa. We're going to count the bread in the kazayis, even though the bread itself is permitted. But now that there's wine soaked into the bread, it forms part of the iser. Says the Gemara. That rule is only limited to Nazir. Everywhere else in the Torah ain't had to mitzdaref lisa. For example, if you ate a piece of, let's say, meat that had fats at the end, treifa fats, and you ate a half a kazayis of the treifa fats and a half a kazayis of the kosher meat, and you ate a kazayis in total, you will not get lashes because the fact of the matter is you only ate a half a kazayis of treif. So ein heter mitzdaref l'isa. The heter does not combine to the isa. Chutz m'isur nazir. What Rabbi Kiva highlighted here regarding a nazir, you dip the bread into wine, is an exception. Shari Amra Torah, because the Torah says mishras. The Torah says you soaked. If you soak the bread, it says mishras anavim. Because it says mishras, so we know that the bread is included. So this is an exception. Ziri says, no, I agree with you that in the vast majority of cases, we were not going to combine the heter with the Easter to form the full quantity, but there is another exception. Ziri says, Afsa oiba bal saktira. The Torah says that on the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to put chametz on the Mizbeach. You're not allowed to have sa'or yeast on the Mizbeach. But if that yeast is not all of it, even though the yeast might not have a kazayis, you have the dough, the yeast you mix with the dough and then it makes the dough rise. And together, the yeast and the dough, you have a kazayis, you are liable and you have committed a sin of kol sa'or b'chol devash, like saktirim and ishal Hashem. Kaman, who did this follow? Rabbi Lozer. Because he dashes the word. How do you know if all other averos you tell me that when we say you're not allowed to eat a treif, a kazayis, it has to be a kazayis of treif. How do we know when it comes to yeast, according to Ziri, that even if you had a half a kazayis of the yeast and a half a kazayis of dough, that we combine the two, the dough itself is not forbidden. How do we know? He dashes the word kol. He dashes the word kol because it says in the pasuk there kol sa'or. The chol devash. So it says kol sa'or. That means even a little bit of sa'or. Kol means kol dehu. He says, if so, we have the same machlek. We'll just finish one more line. We have the same machlek as by chametz. We have the same machlek by chametz if you have a mixture of chametz and other things, do you combine the other things with the chametz? Taruvas, you have a taruvas chametz is called a mixture. We had this in Pesach, a mixture of chametz. Do you need a kazayis of chametz before you get lashes, or even if the combination of whatever the non chametz and the chametz together is a kazayis, you get your lashes. So Rabbi Lezer says kol machmetz is leisachelu. Kol means even a small part of chametz. You combine the two and you're chayiv. So Gemara says, just follow ihachiv sol in your chametz nami. So how come you say the only exception is yeast on the mizbeach? There are two exceptions: yeast on the mizbeach and chametz on Pesach. Now both of them, even though you didn't eat a full kazayis of what's forbidden, but together with the combination of whatever else you ate is a kazayis, you're liable. So Gemara says in hachinami, you're 100% right. Elala Fuke. So what's Azili trying to say? Why does he only highlight Sa'ir? He comes to exclude from Abaye. Abaye says that if you have a half a kazayis of yeast and half a kazayis of dough, you will get lashes, but not because we combine the half a kazayis of the dough with a half a kazayis of wheat, not because of yeast, not because of that, but rather because he says yesh haktorah b'pachas mekazayis. He holds that with this particular sin, even though it's less than the kazayis, you will get your lashes. Comes along, Zita says no, you always need a kazayis to get lashes. So where's your kazayis if you only put a half a kazayis of Sa'ir? If you actually, what happens if you only did yeast, a half a kazayis of yeast on the mizbech? According to Abaye, you still get your lashes because there's a special pasuk called that yeast alone, even if it's less than a half a kazayis, you will get your lashes. Ziri says no. If all you put on the mizbech was a half a kazayis of yeast, you won't get lashes. It's only if it's a half a kazayis of yeast together with a half kazayis of dough. The fact that you put a kazayis, we are going to include the half a kazayis of dough, which is permitted because it became now part and meshed with the half a kazayis of yeast. It becomes a full kazayis, and that's why you like. So according to Zidi, you have two more exceptions besides Nazir, which is chametz on Pesach and Sa'ir, and he only talks about Sa'ir to argue the Abaye. And according to Rabbi Yechon, the only exception is Nazir, that we include the bread with the wine because the Torah clearly says so, and nothing else. I'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah check.